It's okay, and do kind of like a Q&A. And our main goal is just that as a cast, we are showing our audience members what it's like to be an Olympic rower and embodying that from our head to our toe through our message and through our movements as well. And so we've done a lot of research on our own, but we haven't actually got to speak to a real rower. So this is very exciting for us. And we would love just to hear your take on it and like different maybe tips and maybe just like about the inner coach that each athlete had or has. That would be great. So I'm going to go ahead and open the floor. Who's got a question? Y'all come step down and say it if we can make so, because I don't know how loud it is.
Hello there. My question is, what is the physical experience after a race? Would you say that you're like still running off of adrenaline, or you're so exhausted like your body can barely move? How does that feel?
Okay, the feeling is awful. And you have a tendency to put your head down, which is exactly the wrong thing, because with your head down, you can't get air through your throat to your lungs. So the best thing to do is to lean back, but most athletes don't because it's easier to lean forward. So you'll see rowers leaning forward, or those clever ones leaning back so they can get air into their lungs. But everything hurts. And yes, there's adrenaline, and the amount may depend on where you wind up in the order of finish to a certain extent. So that's also a factor. But the way you want to feel, I think, is spent. That you've given all you could give in the race, and that you're not about to get out of the boat and go run a marathon, because what did you do in the boat if you have that much energy left? So it's about focusing all the energy you can into that race, no matter what boat you're in or what the distance of the race might be. This is making me nervous. You guys are writing stuff down.
Yes, we are writing stuff down. But my question to go with that, when you are at the Olympics and you have to, like, because from my understanding, you compete in like multiple races in a span of like multiple days, right? Like, so different heats and like all that kind of thing. How does that happen if you're like super duper exhausted and then they're like, go to your next race? Like, how does that happen?
They do send the schedules out in advance so you can figure it out whether it makes sense or not. And also you have to qualify. If your boat is fast enough the year before the games at the World Championships, your boat class may qualify. For example, if you're in the single, if you're one of the top, I forget how many singles there are, top singles, because it's the last sculling boat. But for, say, the women's 8, you have to be one of the top 6 8s in the world. And then the year of the games, there are 2 slots for 2 more 8s, women's 8s, and the same for men's 8s. So there's a process of qualification, which leads to which boat you're going to be placed in. If you qualify in the year of the games, you have to row on the boat in which you qualified. I don't know why I'm telling you all this stuff. It's definitely, as they say, inside baseball. But it's to let you understand the kind of uncertainness that you go through, because there's something called a spare. We call them spares. They're called emergencies in other English-speaking countries, or reserves. And there might be one person who is a member of the team who is like the Swiss Army knife of rowers. So she can scull, that's rowing with, you guys know what sculling is, or she could sweep on starboard or on port. So that athlete has to be ready, and may be ready for nothing, since no one may, every boat may have its full complement. And that's really hard to do, to keep up your training just in case. Because you really don't want anybody else to be hurt, but it could be convenient for you to actually get into a boat. Because one of the understandable yet seemingly cruel facts of life is to be an Olympian, you have to compete at the games. And it's the only way the IOC could keep the records, because lots of people write in and say, oh, my grandfather did this and that, primarily grandfathers. Soon we'll get more grandmothers, but not quite yet. And to be able to confirm whether that happened or not, we have to look at each sport's results. So the results are dispositive, I'll use a fancy law school word, of whether or not someone is an Olympian. And of course, we women make it somewhat challenging, as we may or may not change our names over our lifetime. But at least it can be followed from the time of competition and then with the country, and therefore we could eventually find out. Wasn't that a very long answer to a short question?
No, it's perfect. Please give us all the information that you can.
Hi.
Yes.
So earlier you mentioned that depending on which position of the boat you're in, you might be a little tired. So would you say, could you just extend a little on that? Like, would you say like specific positions are a little more harder, or they receive like more of the pressure of the boat?
Rowing is the ultimate team sport. We are in it together, which means everybody's got to be pulling as hard as everybody else, or else, it would be some fierce rigging for someone who's just taking a little bitty stroke. They'd have to rig it way, way out. Anyway, it wouldn't work. So, no, it's not that somebody is taking some pressure off, because if they do that, the boat would swing around. So the pressure has to remain even throughout the race. Even if you're in a single, the boat would swing around. So it's essential. And yeah, it is possible, if you're sensitive enough, to tell that there's a little less pressure going on behind you. So I think you might be able to tell on your own side, and I could tell. I believed I could, but my reaction to that was just find a way to put more pressure on to make up for that which I felt was failing behind me. Of course, I have no idea what's going on behind me. It's just an image in the brain. But you do have to trust the rest of the boat, too. That's what also makes it the ultimate team boat. When you get to that starting line, you better believe in everybody in the boat.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Hey, my name is Will. I was just curious, could you talk about the relationship between you and other players, but also with your coach as well? Thank you.
Okay. Wait. Once we're on the Olympic team, did you mean?
Yes, once you're on the Olympic team, kind of relationship with other players,
okay.
Also with Harry Parker, specifically, your relationship with him would be awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, first, until the team is selected, anybody who was on starboard was my adversary, because I was and am a starboard rower. So all the women, probably half of the women, since half of them were starboard and half port, half of the women there were an adversary. And I respected them, but I wanted to be a better rower than they were, because I wanted to be in the fastest boat we could put together. And so it was a process of actually winning seat races. Do you guys know what seat races are? Mm-hmm. Have you ever experienced a seat race? No. Oh, that's all right. Your life is okay even without having that experience, I can assure you. it's when, it's a terrible thing. And for me, the hardest time was when I realized that I had to race one of my best buddies from college, and we were rooming together at the camp, the selection camp, which if you're going to wind up having to race against somebody, you probably don't want to be your best friend and on the same side. So when you think about rooming, think about that in the future. But it was really hard to race against my buddy. Fortunately, everyone knew we were friends. We were both members of the class of 74 of Connecticut College. Yeah, I did mean 1974. Do the math, 50 years ago. We have our 50th reunion this year. How about that? How about that? Yeah, pretty scary. So anyway, it was tough, but I had to decide, am I going to worry about my friend, or do I want to get into the 8-oared shell representing the United States of America? So I chose the latter. And so I wound up winning that seat race. And then, of course, eventually you go back to your room. We were fine. We're still buddies. I took part in their wedding, And she was on the team. She rode in the 4 in 76. So that was good. Boy, I went off the track that time. What else can I regale you on?
To go along with that, like the actual team that you competed with in the Olympics, what was your relationship and dynamic with them? And were you when you got chosen to be on that team, did you practice them for consecutive months, or how did that?
One thing I definitely learned, but I didn't realize it for several years later, that it's very important to race in the boat before you race at the Olympic Games. We did not. We were selected just a little bit before, maybe maximum 10 days before opening ceremonies for the Olympic Games. 10 days. We then loaded up and moved up to Dartmouth, which was closer to Plattsburgh, New York. And we rode for about a week at Dartmouth and had excellent food at Dartmouth for the first time. We didn't have to pay for it. And the men were there too, making it ever so much more interesting as well. Finally. And then we loaded up again and drove to Plattsburgh, where we got our uniforms. And so, after you've been for over a month racing against one another, and unless you knew each other from before the camp started, you didn't really have much chance to make lasting friendships, since the idea was that you needed to be able to be better to show the coach that you could do a better job. Now, as for Harry Parker, he was so well respected and revered by the men of Harvard. He was an icon of a coach, and the guys were aghast when they heard us call him Harry, because nothing less reverent than Coach Parker would come out of their mouths. And here we were, these women showing up and squirting him with a hose and doing things that we adult women could do, because we were all adults. And the guys weren't. When they went to Harvard, they become very wealthy adults later, but at the time, they're kids. And so they couldn't quite figure this out. So they just didn't come by that much towards the end anymore. They didn't want to watch this. Anyway, it was hard to get to know people. Although once we got to Montreal, oh, wait, let me tell you one other story getting there. It doesn't have to do with your play, but it was amazing to me. Two things. The reason I exist is because the USOC, no Paralympic at the time, did not have enough uniforms for the women's rowing team. Now, what? We didn't have enough uniforms for the women's rowing team. Did you not count properly? Like, what? And I guess because I looked the most outraged, my colleagues, I don't know how I got elected captain, but somehow I became team captain. And I spent a lot of time during the games going to the office, which otherwise I would not have known that there was an office for the USOC at the games, and that every National Olympic Committee had an office. And the mystery that continued throughout the game and took a year to clear up completely was, why doesn't every member of the U.S. women's rowing team have the same swag that every other member of the U.S. Olympic team has? So it took a year to do it, but I guess that's when I became an athlete advocate. Because after all, at that time, the only way you got something with rings on it was to be on the team. There was no marketing. There was no place else that you could buy it. You had to be a member of the team to get the team gear. So why did I tell you that? I don't really know.
Actually, that ties in perfectly with our play. There's a little section of like us fighting against the USOC, so that works perfectly.
And it happens to be the character that represents you who ends up going and taking it to the USOC and like talking about it.
Oh, okay, good. I done did that. Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
So in real life, I know you weren't the person to like go to the USOC and be like, this boycott is wrong, we shouldn't do that. But were you like, because I know that you qualified for the 1980 team and everything, and a boycott happened, and then it was like, oh shoot, what the heck? So like, were you one of the 25 athletes to go and sue the committee, or like no? But also like, how did the boycott impact you?
Mm-hmm. Okay. The second reason I exist is because I had, okay, I'll tell it the long way. I had been a part of the testimony that preceded the enacting of the Ted Stevens Amateur and Olympic Sports Act of 1978. It's got a very long title. It's gotten longer. So I knew what the intention of the Congress was. And in fact, my presentation is in the congressional history. Now that stuff is really boring. So if you need to sleep, you can look it up, but otherwise don't. And so I knew it was wrong, and I knew they were taking something from the athletes. He was taking from the athletes that could never be given back. And I knew that not a penny of federal, state, or local government money had gone to helping us train. So it was like, what do you mean we will not be going to Moscow? And eventually I said, what do you mean we?
That's our bell. We're good. It's a
school bell.
It's
Don't
a
mind
lunch
that.
bell. It's
Oh, okay. So where was we when I was freezing a portion of my anatomy off last winter? It's a little more direct, but I won't do that now. When you say we won't be going, you had no investment in me. And therefore, I should be able to move on with my investment and do that American dream thing. But it was so easy for people to just say, oh, sure, yeah, they ought to stay home. That'll show those Soviets, if they stay home, that'll really crush them. And it's like, what? This is impossible. So I continued to fight. And in fact, the lawsuit is called, I guess just for fun, De France against the USOC. So once you get to law school, you'll know how to look that up real fast. Mm-hmm. I guess the internet might do it. I don't look at things that show that I've lost something. So, did I say how much? Finishing up on Harry Parker, 1 second. I felt the great genius of Harry Parker. He knew Coach Parker. I'll call him Coach Parker. He could tell when the boat was going well, or even if it wasn't going well, that the athletes had enough. We never overtrained. And that's magic, especially since it's a boat that had never been together as a boat until 10 days before our first race at the Olympic Games. And yet he could tell when not to push further. And even if we had a specific workout to do, he might, we never knew. So no holding back. He might, cut it short. And I thought that ability was masterful, because especially by the time you get to the games, there's not a whole lot you can do more than make sure that everybody is sharp and ready to go. So that was Harry.
Hi, sorry, I could have stayed sitting down. But this is kind of a more abstract question. If there's one thing that you would want people to gather from your story, I guess, or one thing that you want people to learn from your story, what would it be?
There's a lot of opportunity, and you have to be open to it. I mean, here I am walking across campus and I look at some strange thing and the guy says it's rowing and you'd be perfect. And I didn't know what rowing was. I knew how to row a rowboat, but that didn't look at all like a rowboat when I saw it. So I thought, okay, I'll try it out. And the other thing is, remember to ask for help. It is so important. It's one thing we don't do well in this country. We don't ask for help. We're always about, well, I can do it. Well, why is there more than one person on earth if you can do it? You're supposed to work together and help one another. And thus, the ultimate team sport.
Hi. How was your relationship with your parents while you were in such a time commitment sport that was super intense? Thank you.
Yeah. My parents were back in Indianapolis, where I grew up. And I'm not sure they ever saw rowing until they saw me at the Olympic Games. So I was simply letting them know that I wouldn't be coming home in the summer of 75. And I hoped I wouldn't be coming home in the summer of 76, because I hoped I'd be going to Montreal. We had 3 games in a row: Mexico City, Munich, Montreal, and Moscow. Isn't that it? Anyway, a little factoid. And so I think they thought about, oh, isn't that nice? She thinks she's going to be on the Olympic team. Oh, that's our daughter. Isn't she like that? How's law school going? Most of the conversations like that. How's law school? Yeah, it's like a law school is. We have an exam at the end of the term and in each of the courses, and that's about all you can say, except I had to work and train. So I'm not sure they knew what I was doing. And if they had known, it would have been nice if they told me it was insane that I was trying to do all this and I should stop at once and do one thing at a time. But they didn't know, so they didn't say. I almost timed it correctly. So I think they would have been delighted and supportive, because everything every other bizarre thing I'd done thus far had been fully supported by them. But when I sprang the rowing thing, I'm sure they were dragging out the Encyclopedia Britannica and trying to figure out what the heck I was doing, because there was no reference for them in Indianapolis or anywhere in my background until the games. And that was the first time I think they saw rowing. Excuse me, there's a bug in here. So supportive, but probably there was a big old question mark over their heads when they showed up in Montreal to see what their daughter, granddaughter, sister, etc. Oh, and aunt, because I had a nephew who was there. And one of the things when you're at the games, well, nowadays you have cell phones, so it wouldn't be a problem. But back then, you weren't really sure where anyone was. I was hopeful that my parents had made it, my family had made it, but I had no way of knowing for certain. And it wasn't until we pulled over to the dock at the end of the regatta to receive our medals that I heard this little voice that was my nephew saying, "Lucy, get out of the boat." That's my family name. So I hear this little bitty voice and I get out of the boat, and then I hear it say, "Lucy, put some shoes on." So I was embarrassed because I was in stocking feet. So then I knew they were there, which made me happy. So it's a little bit stressful, and I know with text messages and such, it would be easier. But then you've got to read and answer those text messages. So I don't know if it's any easier today than it was back then. Back then, we knew we weren't going to get phone calls because it was too hard to figure out how to do it. You haven't asked about the boat and what boat. Oh, sorry. You have your own question.
Sorry. So you mentioned that in your first Olympics, you only had 10 days to row with the girls that you were in the boat with. Was it hard to trust them or make that team with them? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it wasn't hard because we had a common focus and a common goal and a common determination to win a gold medal. So we did what we needed to. And there were 3 women from Wisco. By the way, in the rowing world, and it's only rowers who call Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin, Wisco. So if you want to be a rower, you need to call it Wisco instead of Wisconsin. There were 3 women from Wisco in the boat. The stroke, who was in front of me, I was 7th seat, and 6th seat, who was behind me. In order to answer an earlier question, depending on the coach, oftentimes 654 is what you call the engine room, and 2 and bow are technicians so that they won't throw off the set of the boat. And of course, 8 is the stroke, and 7 is absolutely the most important position in the boat. No, they're all equally important. My job was to be not to rush the stroke, to make sure that I was with her and that every time my blade went in exactly with her so the rest of starboard could key off of it and not have to look out to the stroke as much. So anyway, that was responsibility, and I took it that way. But, everybody has to be very, very strong and very, very determined. And we were one very determined boat. We may have looked like, as one so-called friend observed, a concrete mixer coming down the course, but we made it down the course. And you know the story about the very first race. I'm sure I told you that last time. But I know the story, so I could tell it again. Yes?
Yes.
Yes, all right. Well, as I said, we had never raced, and we go to the Olympic Games as the U.S. team. And I don't think any of us, well, I sure didn't, nobody mentioned it, thought it was odd that we hadn't raced. There was no time. So we did what we needed to do. So we get to the start, and the pieces, the parts of training that you do, we call them pieces. The pieces had been going well, and Harry seemed to be okay. You know, you do a little more rigging to the boat to tighten it up. And so we're ready. We're at the start, and we go off. And to our right is East Germany, a country that no longer exists, or the GDR, but basically we call them East Germany. And they had the best jelly beans in the world at the time. So they trained artists, and they were by far really fast. But we held them through the first 500, and we were still, you know, they had maybe 2 seats on us, 3 seats on us with the last 250. And our coxswain called for a sprint, and it was like we went into a brick wall. And it's like our first race, and I'm thinking, nobody behind me's pulling, so I'm going to drag this boat across the finish line if I have to. I'm not sure if I had that much time to think, but I was just shocked because the boat was like we'd hit a brick wall. And then we get back on it, and a couple strokes later, I noticed off in the distance something that looks like one of our blades, one of our oars floating away. And I'm thinking, uh-oh. And sure enough, we get to the finish line, and our bow woman is there with her head in her hands. I don't know how she could breathe, because, I mean, that she caught a boat, a race-ending crab, which, of course, could not happen at that level. And I never have talked to her about it, but I have so much admiration for her being able to get back in the boat, and we won a bronze medal. So it was all's well that ends well. Could we have won maybe a silver? I don't think so, because the Soviets, who kind of ran the Easties, as you know, they were the power group, probably had pretty good jelly beans too. And I know they had a lot of investment in rowing, because rowing was very important in the Soviet Union. So, you know, we were cheated out of the medal we should have won. As I say, though, every time I look at that race, we come in third. And they tested people, but the doping, it makes a difference when you're training, not when you're racing. It's too late by the time you race. It's all about training and recovering that the performance-enhancing drugs. And that's how you get more muscles and whatever else you need that you don't have the courage to develop on your own. Just an opinion tossed in there.
Hi, me again. I forgot to say my name earlier. I'm Gabby. I was looking into it, and I've like seen some things where like it's common for y'all to get blisters on your hands because of the oars. Does that ever like affect you now, or like how would that yeah, what were like the long lasting effects of that?
Something to talk about for sure. But there, I can see pads. Well, can you see my hand? Wait. There are little pads underneath there. So if I started rowing again, they would look a little bit more, maybe more like your knuckles do. But no, the long lasting, I mean, and they're less likely to split again. Although, what was I doing? Maybe I was doing some lawn work and I got a little blister in here. Well, you don't hold the oar in there, you're there, and you hold on to it loosely and then push it away. Anyway, it's really hard to do a rowing thing while you're sitting down across the country from the people looking. I should have a little bitty shell or something to be able to show that. Get one of these engineers to build it for me.
Hi. I didn't know we were saying names. I'm Liliana.
Okay.
I was wondering, what was it like for you balancing rowing and law school at the same time?
It was necessary, and so I did it. It was impossible, so I did it. It was ridiculous to do it. Don't do that at the same time unless you really have to, because it just took a lot of everything. And probably because I was, I'm sure I was stressed out. We didn't know about things like that back then. And I know I was stressed out financially and food-wise, but you do what you need to do. Women in particular have learned that to get to the finish line, you've got to put the shoes on, or in our case, get into the boat and master the skills. I hope I'm answering your questions and not being too oblique. I know I'm always oblique. But.
Oh, you're so good. To go along with that, what really kept you motivated to even just continue, even after a long day of practice, then you have to go and do a bunch of other stuff and study and all this other stuff. What really kept you motivated to continue?
Well, where does the determination come from? As I thought I inartfully said, although I've been quoted many times for saying this, you need to keep your goal within sight, but just out of reach. So you've got to keep pushing and pushing. Maybe I said it the other way, but anyway. So I kept that goal, and I knew the dates, where progress could be made. First, you had to get seen by the coaches, and you had to get invited to the camp, then you had to figure out how you're going to be able to afford this. I had to figure out what to do about my apartment, should I be so fortunate to make the team. But even the 2.5 weeks of the selection camp, I had to figure out what to do. I mean, there were just so many things that were caused by my arrogant self thinking I could do whatever I wanted to do at the same time as I was doing something that very few people do on either side, actually, at that time, law school or Olympic team. But I guess, and I shouldn't say but, and I guess I had a level of confidence that convinced me that I could do it. Can you convince yourself that you can do something that you probably couldn't otherwise? I think so. I think you can.
We're determining our last question because our class period is about to end.
Sorry, too long. I was my class period.
More bells.
Hi, I'm Sine. So after you'd been rowing with all the girls for a while, would you say that you naturally developed a strong connection with everybody, or were there certain people who you were closer with, or did you not really have time to have a close connection with everyone? How did
Maybe some of everything that you just said. Everyone is too many for me, but one or two, like my best buddy from Connecticut College, also went to University of Pennsylvania. I went to law school. She went to nursing school, and we remained friends. Although this is the one who I raced against, and wound up being invited to be a part of her wedding, nevertheless. So yeah, a couple of friends, but we had a common motive, and we were honored. The 8 was honored 40 years later, and our stroke spoke on our behalf, and she said, well, one thing we're grateful for, you honored us while we're all still alive. So 40 years they wait to honor us. There was a young man from my college who competed in 2008, and he was already, anyway. So other questions? I know you have other educational things you have to do.
That was the last one. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you
for
so
being
much.
interested in this. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Yes, we are so thankful for you and your time. So thank you so much for allowing us to ask you some questions. And we hope we do this play justice in your honor and all the good things. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you
care,
so
ladies. and
Thank
gentlemen.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Responding to
you.
my emails.
Thank you.